I am 70 years old. My name is Mercedes Vega, and for 3 decades I served as a magistrate on the Supreme Court of Madrid. But they never knew it. I never told them. I preferred to just be Mom, just Grandma, just that woman who made Spanish tortilla on Sundays and secretly gave Raphael money when he was having problems. That invisible woman who didn't deserve a seat at the table when there were important guests. I hid my identity as if it were a shameful secret. I concealed my achievements, my degrees, my landmark cases, everything. Because I thought that if I were less imposing, if I were smaller, quieter, simpler, then they would love me more. They would need me more. They would include me more. How wrong I was. Raphael was born when I was 27 years old. His father, Antonio, was a good man, hard-working, honest. He was a history professor at Complutense University. We met during a conference about the Spanish Constitution. He spoke with such passion about the democratic transition that I couldn't help approaching him afterward. We married a year later, bought a small house in the Chambéry neighborhood, and when Raphael was born, we believed our happiness was complete. But Antonio died in a traffic accident when Raphael was just 15 years old. A drunk driver ran a red light on Gran Via. In an instant, my world collapsed. I was left alone with a teenage son, a house we were still paying for bills that never stopped coming. But I didn't give up. I worked double shifts for years at the municipal court where I was an assistant. I completed my law studies while Raphael slept. I studied at the kitchen table until 3 in the morning with a cup of cold coffee beside me and books scattered everywhere. I graduated with honors. I got a position at the prosecutor's office. I rose quickly through the ranks. I became a judge at 42 years old. I did everything for him to give him a better life so he could attend a good university so he would want for nothing. And Raphael succeeded. He graduated as a lawyer. He opened his own firm on Paseo de la Castellana. He began making money. A lot of money. I was proud. So proud it hurt. I saw my son wearing expensive suits, driving a new car, eating at restaurants I had never been to. And I thought that it had all been worth it, that all those years of sacrifice had finally paid off. Then he met Carmen. The first time I saw Carmen Dominguez was at a Christmas Eve dinner. Raphael brought her without warning. She arrived in a tight black dress, very high heels, and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Contempt. She sat at my table. She looked around my house with an expression she couldn't completely hide, as if she were evaluating every old piece of furniture, every faded curtain, every chipped plate I had used for decades. I served her the dinner I had prepared, bacalao al pil-pil roast lamb, homemade turon. Nothing fancy, nothing sophisticated, just homemade food made with love. Carmen barely took 2 bites. She said it was delicious, but she was watching her figure. Raphael didn't say anything. He just ate in silence while she talked about her work, her important clients, the cases she had won. Carmen came from a wealthy family in Barcelona. Her father was a renowned plastic surgeon, and her mother had inherited properties all over Catalonia. She had studied at the best private schools, had spent summers in Marbella, and had earned a master's degree in law in the United States. Compared to her, my Raphael seemed small, and I insignificant. That night when they left, I heard Carmen talking to Raphael at the door. She wasn't shouting, but her voice was clear, cold. "Your mother lives in this tiny house. Can't you do something about that? It gives a bad impression, Raphael. People will think you don't care about her." Raphael mumbled something I couldn't hear, but he didn't defend her. He didn't defend me. And I, standing on the other side of the door, my hands still wet from washing dishes, felt something breaking inside me. But I told myself it was just a first impression, that Carmen was nervous, that things would get better over time, that she just needed to get to know me better. How naive I was. They got married 6 months later, an ostentatious wedding at a mansion in El Escorial that cost over 50,000 euros. I didn't give my opinion on anything. They didn't ask for my opinion. They just told me the date and place. I sat in the 3rd row during the ceremony, behind Carmen's important friends, behind Raphael's firm partners, like just another guest, like someone who didn't really matter. After the wedding, things changed. Raphael started visiting me less. The calls became shorter. The Sunday lunches we used to share gradually disappeared. There was always an excuse. Work, travel, social commitments. And when he did come, Carmen came with him. Always critical, always pointing out what was wrong with my house. The walls needed paint. The furniture was outdated. The garden was neglected. I should hire someone to help me. I should move to a smaller place. I should. She never asked how I was. She never asked if I needed anything. She only pointed out my flaws as if they were obvious to everyone. Raphael didn't say anything. He stayed sitting on the sofa looking at his phone, nodding distractedly while she talked. And I smiled. I nodded. I thanked her for her advice, even though it hurt, because I thought that if I showed myself to be docile, if I made myself small, if I didn't cause problems, then they would keep coming, then I would still be a part of their lives. But each visit was worse than the last, each comment more hurtful, each silence from Raphael heavier. There was no explanation for Carmen's hostility. After some time, I began to understand that her contempt wasn't personal. She was a deeply insecure woman who needed to feel superior. Despite her wealth and education, something in her always seemed to be seeking validation. I saw her once during a visit looking wistfully at a photograph of my wedding to Antonio. For a moment, her mask fell, and I saw longing in her eyes. Perhaps she envied something she had never experienced: unconditional love. Then the girls were born. Sophia first. 2 years later, Elena, my granddaughters, 2 beautiful creatures with Raphael's eyes and Antonio's smile. I thought everything would change. I thought that being a grandmother would give me a new place in the family, a purpose, a reason for them to need me again. But Carmen wouldn't let me see them. There was always a reason. The girls were sick. They had activities. They were tired. Carmen preferred them to be with the other grandmother, her mother, who lived in a big house with a pool and staff in the outskirts of Barcelona. I sent them gifts on their birthdays, dolls' books, clothes that I chose carefully. I never received a thank you call. I never saw photos of them wearing what I had sent them. Just silence. One day I plucked up the courage and asked Raphael if I could take the girls to Retiro Park. Just a few hours. Just to get to know them better so they would know who their grandmother was. Raphael was silent for a long moment. Then he said he would talk to Carmen. That conversation never happened. Or if it did, the answer was no, because he never mentioned it again. And I didn't insist because I didn't want to be annoying. I didn't want to be the type of mother-in-law who causes problems. The years passed. I retired from the court at 68 years old. 30 years of service, hundreds of cases, thousands of decisions that changed lives. But on the day of my retirement, Raphael didn't attend the ceremony. He said he had an important hearing. Carmen didn't even respond to my message. I went home alone that afternoon with a commemorative plaque under my arm with a bouquet of flowers my colleagues gave me, with a heart so heavy I could barely breathe. And there, sitting in my empty living room looking at the walls, Carmen said needed paint. I made a decision. I wouldn't tell them I had been a judge. I wouldn't tell them about my career. I wouldn't show them my achievements. Because if 30 years of work hadn't made Raphael come to my retirement ceremony, then nothing would. I would just be mom, just grandma, just that simple woman who lived in a small house and didn't bother too much. But that decision came with a price, because the more invisible I made myself, the more they treated me as if I didn't exist. Family gatherings at Raphael's house became frequent elegant dinners, birthday parties for the girls' gatherings with important friends. I was never invited. I found out by chance from a photo on social media from a comment Raphael accidentally let slip. Once I showed up unannounced at one of those parties. It was Sophia's birthday. My granddaughter was turning 9 years old. I rang the doorbell with a gift in my hands, a storybook I had looked for in different bookstores for weeks. Carmen opened the door. She looked me up and down. She wouldn't let me in. "Mercedes, I didn't know you were coming. This is just for close family and Sophia's friends. There's no room at the table." "I am family," I said. "I am her grandmother." Carmen smiled, a cold smile calculated. "Of course you are, but the child doesn't know you well. We don't want her to feel uncomfortable at her own party." She closed the door in my face. I stood there at the entrance with the gift in my hands, listening to the laughter coming from inside. Children's laughter, music, happiness, everything on the other side of that closed door. I walked back to my house. I didn't take a taxi. I didn't call anyone. I just walked the 15 blocks back with the book under my arm and tears running down my face. That night I wondered what I had done wrong. At what point did I lose my son? At what point did I stop mattering? But I found no answers. Only a huge void that grew bigger every day. 2 more years passed. Things didn't get better. They got worse. Raphael stopped visiting me completely. Phone calls were reduced to 1 every 2 months. 5-minute conversations where he asked if I was okay, and I said yes, even though it wasn't true. Then 6 months ago, I found something that changed everything. Something that woke me up from that silent nightmare I was living in. It was an accident. Raphael came to my house because he needed some old documents I was keeping. His father's life insurance papers. He arrived in a hurry. He left his phone on the kitchen table while he searched in the study, and the phone rang. It was a message. The screen lit up and I accidentally saw what it said. It was from Carmen. I already spoke to the attorney. We can have her declared incompetent in 6 months. The house is worth 175,000 euros. We sell it and keep the money. She can go to a nursing home. She won't even realize it. I read that message 3 times. 4, 5. The letters burned in my eyes as if they were made of fire. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move my fingers. I could only stand there staring at that illuminated screen, those cold, calculated words that had just shattered what little was left of my world. Declare her incompetent, as if I were an object, as if at 70 years old I no longer had a mind of my own, as if I couldn't make my own decisions, as if I were a burden that had to be quickly and guiltlessly discarded. The house is worth 175,000 euros. That house where I raised Raphael, where I cried over Antonio's death, where I spent whole nights studying to become a judge, where I kept every memory of my life. That house I paid for with my work, with my effort, with my own hands. They wanted to sell it, keep the money, and send me to a nursing home as if I were trash. I heard Raphael's footsteps returning from the study. I picked up the phone and put it exactly where it was. I wiped my tears with the back of my hand. I took a deep breath. And when he walked into the kitchen with the papers in his hand, I was pouring coffee as if nothing had happened. "Thanks, Mom. I have to go. Meeting in half an hour." "Of course, son. Drive safely." He kissed me on the forehead. A quick kiss, automatic, meaningless. He took his phone. He left. And I stayed there, standing in my kitchen, the coffee cup trembling in my hand, feeling the ground disappear beneath my feet. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with the lights off, staring into the darkness, trying to process what I had read, trying to understand how my own son could do something like that, how he could plan my life without consulting me, without asking me, without even having the decency to look me in the eye. But I already knew the answer. Raphael wasn't the son I raised. He wasn't the boy who cried in my arms when he had nightmares. He wasn't the teenager who hugged me when he missed his father. That Raphael had disappeared years ago, replaced by a man who only looked forward toward money, toward status, toward what Carmen told him to look at. And Carmen, that woman who entered my life like a silent storm and destroyed everything in her path. She was the architect of my pain, the one who whispered poison in my son's ear, the one who turned me into an enemy every time I opened my mouth. Later, when we investigated her finances, I would discover the truth behind her desperation. Carmen had invested heavily in a tourism development project in Costa del Sol. The developer turned out to be a scammer who fled with millions. She had lost all her inheritance money and was now drowning in debts she carefully hid from Raphael. My house, my inheritance, was her lifeline. But there was something she didn't know, something Raphael didn't know either. I wasn't a defenseless old woman who was going to let herself be trampled without doing anything. I wasn't a woman without resources, without intelligence, without power. For 30 years, I was a judge. I resolved cases of inheritance, of fraud, of family manipulation. I saw children betraying parents' wives, stealing from husbands, families destroying themselves over money. And I learned something fundamental. The law does not forgive those who act with malice. And justice, when applied correctly, can change everything. The next morning, I called my attorney, Javier Morales, a man I met 20 years ago when I presided over his case. He had been unjustly accused of fraud. The evidence was flimsy. The prosecution was in a hurry. But I took the time to review every document, every testimony, and I discovered he was innocent. I acquitted him. I gave him a second chance. And he never forgot it. Every year on the date of the verdict, he sent me a card thanking me. Every Christmas, I received a fruit basket with a handwritten note. And when I retired, he was one of the few who attended my ceremony. Javier answered my call on the second ring. "Mrs. Vega, what a surprise. How are you?" "I need your help, Javier. It's urgent." We met in his office that same afternoon. I told him everything, the message I had seen, the years of contempt, Carmen's plan to have me declared incompetent. Javier listened in silence, taking notes, shaking his head in disapproval. When I finished, he put the pen down on the desk and looked at me with those dark eyes that had seen too much in his life. Mrs. Vega, this is serious, but we have options and we have time. If they are going to try to declare you incompetent, they will need medical evidence, psychological evaluations, testimonies. They can't do it overnight. I know, but I don't want to wait for them to try. I want to protect myself. I want that when the time comes, they don't have a chance. Javier nodded. Then we're going to bulletproof you legally, medically, emotionally. We are going to get evaluations of your mental health certificates of your cognitive capacity. We are going to revise your will, and we are going to make sure that no one, absolutely no one, can touch you without your consent. That's what we did. For the following weeks, I underwent neurological evaluations, memory tests, complete psychological exams. The results were impeccable. My mind was completely healthy. My decision-making capacity was intact. Any judge who reviewed those documents would conclude the same. There was no way to declare me incompetent. Javier also revised my will. We completely rewrote it. Rafael was still my heir, but with conditions. He could not sell the house without my express authorization. He could not make decisions about my health without my consent. He could not receive a single cent until I died. And if he tried to manipulate my will while I was alive, he would lose everything. I signed every document with a steady hand, without hesitation, without tears, because this was no longer about pain. This was about survival. But I didn't stop there. I started investigating. Javier hired a private investigator, a discreet man who had worked on similar cases. We asked him to follow Carmen to check her finances, her legal cases, her movements. And what we found was worse than I imagined. Carmen had been diverting money from the firm she shared with Rafael. Small amounts at first, 500 euros here, 1,000 euros there, but over time the sums grew. 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 euros that disappeared into phantom accounts. Rafael knew nothing or pretended not to know, but the evidence was there. Transfers receipts, emails where Carmen talked to her accountant about how to hide the money, how to disguise it as operating expenses. We also discovered that Carmen had debts, many debts, credit cards with balances of 30,000 euros, personal loans she hadn't paid. And worst of all, she had mortgaged the house where they lived with Rafael without him knowing. She had forged his signature. She had used the firm's papers to make it look legitimate. That woman was desperate. And my house, my inheritance, was her lifeline. That's why she wanted to declare me incompetent. That's why she wanted to sell it fast. Because she needed the money before everything collapsed. But most shocking was discovering the relationship Carmen maintained with Diego Torres, a judge on the Superior Court of Justice. It wasn't a romantic relationship, but it was compromising. There were emails, text messages, and photographs of private dinners where they discussed cases in which he ended up ruling in favor of Carmen's clients. It was an ethical line no lawyer should cross. Javier organized all the documents into a thick folder. Proof of fraud, proof of forgery, proof of embezzlement. Enough to ruin Carmen's career, enough to get her into serious legal trouble. But I didn't want to use it yet. Not immediately. Because there was something else. I wanted something more important than legal justice. I wanted them to know who I was. I wanted them to see me, really see me. Not as the annoying old woman who was cluttering up their perfect lives, but as the woman I had always been, the judge, the professional, the one who had resolved cases more complicated than any they had touched. Javier looked at me curiously when I told him my plan. Are you sure, Mrs. Vega? This can be risky. If they suspect something ahead of time, they could change their strategy. I'm sure. Trust me, Javier, I know what I'm doing. And yes, I did know, because I had spent 3 decades doing exactly this, planning, strategizing, waiting for the perfect moment to act. Javier made some calls. He called his contacts at the courthouse. He asked about upcoming cases where Carmen was involved as an attorney. And he found one, a big case, important one that Carmen had been preparing for months. It was a commercial dispute case, one company suing another for breach of contract. The amount at stake was 500,000 euros. Carmen represented the plaintiff, and she needed to win because if she lost, her reputation would be stained. Clients would start to doubt, and with the debts she had, she couldn't afford that luxury. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks away, a Tuesday morning, courtroom 3 of the Madrid Court of First Instance. Javier smiled when he told me. Guess who was assigned as the judge for that case? I smiled too for the first time in months. A real smile. A smile that came from some deep place I thought was dead. Tell me, Pilar Navarro, your former court clerk. She handles the assignments now, and when she saw the case, she thought you might be interested in coming back. Just this once as a visiting judge, a special favor. Pilar did that? Yes. She always thought highly of you, Mrs. Vega, and when I told her what was happening without going into details, she understood. She said it would be an honor to have you back, even if just for a day. I accepted. Of course I accepted because this was more than a legal case. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment where everything would change. I spent the next 3 weeks preparing. I reviewed every document of the case, every argument, every legal precedent. I made sure I knew every detail better than the attorneys themselves. I also prepared myself emotionally because I knew that when Carmen saw me sitting in that chair, when Raphael finally understood who his mother was, everything was going to explode. And I needed to be ready. I needed to be strong. I needed to remain calm, even if I was shaking inside. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, reviewing every word I would say, every gesture I would make. I thought of Antonio, how proud he would be, how he would hug me and tell me I did the right thing. And I thought of Raphael, the boy he was, the man he became, and I wondered if there was still anything left of the son I loved inside that stranger who planned to lock me up. At 6:00 in the morning, I got up. I showered. I dressed in simple clothes, a beige sweater, dark pants, flat shoes. I wanted to look exactly as they expected, fragile, insignificant, invisible. I took a taxi to the courthouse. I arrived early. I stood outside looking at that building where I had spent so many years of my life, where I had made decisions that changed destinies, where I had been someone important. And then I saw them arrive. Raphael arrived first with his gray suit, his leather briefcase, his serious face. Behind him came Carmen with a fitted black dress, high heels, and that arrogant smile I knew so well. They didn't see me at first. They were walking quickly, talking to each other. Carmen was saying something about the case, about how she was going to destroy the opposing party, about how this victory would open important doors for them. Then they saw me, and everything changed. Carmen stopped abruptly when she saw me standing next to the courthouse entrance. Her eyes scanned me up and down with that contempt I knew so well. Raphael looked away uncomfortable, as he always did when he knew something was wrong, but didn't want to confront it. "Mercedes, what are you doing here?" It wasn't a question. It was an accusation, as if I had no right to be in that public place, as if my mere presence were an offense. "Good morning, Carmen. Good morning, Raphael." My voice came out calm, serene, exactly as I had practiced it. Raphael mumbled a barely audible greeting. Carmen didn't even respond. She just looked at me with those cold eyes that seemed to evaluate how long it would take her to get rid of me. "Do you have some paperwork here? Because if you need help with something legal, you can go somewhere else. We have an important hearing." I smiled. A small, controlled smile. "I know. Good luck with your case." Carmen frowned, confused, probably wondering how I knew about her case, but I didn't give her time to ask. I turned around and started walking toward the entrance. And then it happened. Carmen caught up to me in 3 steps. She grabbed my arm hard. Her fingers dug into my skin like claws. We were in a side hallway less crowded than the main entrance, but there were still people passing by. "Wait, why are you really here? Did you come to bother us? Did you come to make us look bad in front of important people?" Her voice rose in volume. Some people began turning to look. A young court clerk, whose badge read Ana Suarez, slowed her pace as she passed us, watching the scene carefully. "Carmen, let go of me, please." "No, I want to know what you're doing here. You always show up where you're not invited. Always in the way. Always ruining everything." She pushed me not hard enough to knock me down, but enough to make me stumble back against the wall. My back hit the cold marble. The pain spread through my old bones. Raphael was still standing a few meters away, watching, doing nothing. I could see that Ana Suarez, the young clerk, had discreetly taken out her phone and was holding it at an odd angle, as if she were recording. "You're an embarrassment, Mercedes. A filthy old woman who doesn't know when to disappear. Look at yourself with those horrible clothes, with that unkempt hair. You're pitiful. You're pitiful even to your own son. That's why we never invite you to anything, because you embarrass us." The words came out of her mouth like poison, and each one stabbed me in the chest, but I didn't answer. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just looked at her, memorizing every detail of her face, every cruel gesture, because I knew that in a few minutes, all that would change. Carmen let me go with a final shove. She shook her hands as if she had just touched something dirty. Raphael finally approached, but not to me, to her. He put his hand on her shoulder, a gesture of support, of complicity. "Let's go, Carmen. We're going to be late." She nodded. She gave me one last look of contempt, and they both walked toward the courthouse entrance without looking back. I stayed there for a few more seconds, breathing, feeling the sting on my cheek where her hand had struck me, feeling the pain in my back where the wall had met me, feeling every cell in my body scream for justice. Ana Suarez approached me cautiously. "Are you all right, ma'am? Should we call security?" "I'm perfectly fine, thank you. Security isn't necessary." "But that woman? The way she treated you?" "Don't worry, dear. Everything is under control." I looked directly into her eyes and saw gradual understanding in her gaze. She nodded slightly as if she had captured something she couldn't express in words. "I've recorded everything just in case you need evidence." I smiled at her, grateful for her perceptiveness. "Very considerate, Ana. Could you send that recording to this email?" I handed her a small card that Javier had prepared for me with a secure address. Then I moved. Not through the main door, not behind them. I took the side hallway, the one only judges use, the one that led directly to the private offices. Pilar Navarro was waiting for me. She hugged me as soon as she saw me. "Mrs. Vega, you're trembling. Are you all right?" "Perfectly fine, Pilar. Thank you for everything." She took me to the robbing room. She helped me take off the beige sweater. She reached for the black robe hanging in the closet with my name on it. Mercedes Vega, Magistrate. I put it on slowly, feeling the familiar weight of the fabric, feeling something inside me wake up after years of being dormant. It wasn't revenge I felt. It was dignity. It was a reminder of who I had always been, who I still was despite everything. Pilar looked at me with tears in her eyes. "We miss you here, Mrs. Vega. This place isn't the same without you." "I've missed you too." I adjusted the robe. I put on my glasses. I looked at myself in the mirror. 70 years old gray hair, wrinkles that told stories of pain and resilience, but also strength, also wisdom, also power. "I'm ready." Pilar walked me to the door of courtroom 3. Before I entered, she squeezed my hand. "Make them understand who you are, Mrs. Vega. Make them see." "I will." I pushed the door open. The security guard greeted me with respect. He cleared the way for me, and I entered that courtroom that I knew by heart, where I had spent thousands of hours, where I had changed lives with my decisions. The room was full. Carmen was sitting in the first row, reviewing papers, talking with her assistant, so confident, so sure of her victory. Raphael was further back alone, waiting without imagining what was about to happen. I went up the 3 steps to the bench. I sat in the high chair. I placed my hands on the desk. I took a deep breath, and I waited. The murmur of the room continued until someone looked up, until the silence began to spread like an oil stain. Carmen still didn't see me focused on her documents in her perfect world that was about to collapse. The court clerk stood up. He cleared his throat. "All rise, the Honorable Judge Mercedes Vega will preside over this hearing." And that was when Carmen looked up. When she saw me, when her whole world stopped. Carmen's face went through a dozen emotions in a matter of seconds. First confusion, then disbelief, then pure panic. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. The papers she was holding in her hands fell to the floor with a dry sound that echoed in the absolute silence of the room. Raphael stood up so quickly that his chair tipped backward. His face had lost all color. He looked at me as if he were seeing a ghost, as if the world as he knew it had just broken into 1,000 pieces. I didn't say anything yet. I just observed them calmly with the same serenity I had maintained for 30 years in this place, the same one I had used to face aggressive lawyers, lying witnesses, and impossible cases. The clerk spoke again, his voice cutting through the heavy silence. "All rise to receive your honor." The whole room stood up. Everyone except Carmen. She was still sitting paralyzed, her eyes fixed on me as if she couldn't process what she was seeing. Her assistant had to touch her shoulder twice before she finally reacted and stood up with trembling legs. "Good morning. Please be seated." My voice came out firm, clear, exactly as it should be. The room obeyed. The sound of bodies settling into chairs filled the space for a moment. I opened the folder in front of me. Case number 2023-037, Valle Construction Company versus Cedillo Urban Developments. Contractual dispute over breach of clauses. Amount claimed €500,000. I looked up. Attorney Carmen Dominguez represents the plaintiff. Attorney Mateo Fuentes represents the defendant. Are both parties present and ready to proceed? The defense attorney answered immediately. Yes, Your Honor. Carmen was still silent. Her assistant nudged her discreetly. She blinked. She swallowed. She tried to speak, but her voice came out broken, barely a whisper. Yes. Excuse me, Attorney Dominguez. I didn't hear you. Are you ready to proceed? My tone was professional neutral, exactly the same one I used with any attorney. But my eyes looked directly at her, and she knew. She knew that I knew. She knew this wasn't a coincidence. Yes, Your Honor, I am ready. Excellent. Then let us begin. Attorney Dominguez, present your opening arguments. Carmen stood up. Her hands trembled as she collected the papers from the floor. Some fell again. Her assistant bent down to help her. The entire room watched, some with curiosity, others with discomfort. Everyone sensed that something was out of place. Carmen finally managed to stand in front of the bench. She took a deep breath. She tried to regain that arrogant confidence that characterized her, but she couldn't. Her voice came out insecure, choppy. Your Honor, my client Valle Construction Company signed a contract with Cedillo Urban Developments for a value of €200,000. I stopped her there. I raised my hand. Excuse me, Attorney Dominguez. According to the documents I have in front of me, the contract was for $500,000, not $200,000. Carmen paled even more. She searched frantically among her papers. You are right, Your Honor. I made a mistake. €500,000. Continue. She tried to continue, but her concentration was shattered. She got the dates wrong. She mentioned incorrect clauses. She forgot fundamental details that any competent lawyer should know by heart in a case she had prepared for months. I corrected her every time, patiently, professionally, but also firmly, exactly as I would with any lawyer who came unprepared to my courtroom. Raphael was still sitting in the back. I saw him out of the corner of my eye. His head was in his hands. His world was collapsing. Everything he thought he knew about his mother, about his life, about reality itself, was falling apart. After 20 minutes of disastrous arguments, I stopped Carmen. Attorney Dominguez, I see you are having difficulty presenting your arguments coherently. Do you need a recess? No, Your Honor, I can continue. Are you sure? Because if you are not properly prepared for this case, I can postpone the hearing. I saw the panic in her eyes. Postponing meant admitting incompetence. It meant her client would lose confidence. It meant the end of her reputation. I am prepared, Your Honor. Then I suggest you focus on the facts and stop wasting this court's time with basic errors. Yes, Your Honor. The humiliation on her face was evident. That woman who had called me a filthy old woman less than an hour ago was now being reprimanded by me in front of a room full of professionals. That woman who had pushed me against a wall was now trembling under my gaze. But I didn't feel satisfaction. Not yet. This wasn't personal revenge. This was justice. This was showing them who I really was. Not the weak mother they thought, not the old woman who was in the way, but the respected professional, the judge who had earned her place with work and dedication. Carmen finally finished her opening argument. She sat down with her face red with shame. Her assistant whispered something in her ear, but she didn't respond. She just stared straight ahead with an empty expression. Attorney Fuentes, your opening arguments, please. The defense attorney stood up. He presented his arguments clearly organized professionally. Everything Carmen had failed to do. The difference was abysmal. When he finished, I reviewed my notes. I analyzed the documents. And then I said something I knew would destroy Carmen. Attorney Dominguez, I have reviewed the documents you presented, and I note several inconsistencies. The dates on some of the contracts do not match the testimonies you mention. The amounts you are claiming are not backed up by the attached invoices, and there are 3 clauses that your argument directly contradicts. I paused. I looked at her directly. Can you explain these inconsistencies? Carmen stood up awkwardly. She opened and closed her mouth several times. She searched desperately among her papers, but she had no answers. Because the truth was that she had prepared the case halfway confident in her ability to improvise, to manipulate, to win with arrogance instead of work. I would need to review my files, Your Honor. You should have reviewed your files before coming to my courtroom, Attorney Dominguez. This court does not tolerate professional negligence." The silence that followed was crushing. Everyone in the room knew what had just happened. Carmen Dominguez, the arrogant lawyer who thought she was invincible, had just been exposed as incompetent by a judge who turned out to be her own mother-in-law. Raphael suddenly got up. He almost ran out of the room. The door closed behind him with a dry bang. Carmen watched him leave, and in her eyes I saw something I had never seen before. Real fear. Because she knew that Raphael had just understood everything, that his mother was not what he thought, and that his wife had just humiliated herself in front of the woman they planned to destroy. "We will take a recess of 30 minutes. When we return, I expect both parties to be ready to proceed with professionalism. This hearing will resume at 11 Hurry." I banged the gavel against the desk. The sound echoed in the room like thunder. "Court is recessed." The room slowly emptied. Carmen remained seated, motionless, with a lost gaze. Her assistant tried to talk to her, but she didn't respond. I stepped down from the bench. I walked toward my temporary office with my back straight and my head held high. Every step resonated in the empty hallway, and as I walked, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power, dignity, and the absolute certainty that this was just beginning. The 30-minute recess felt like an eternity. I sat in the small office that Pilar had prepared for me, looking out the window toward the courthouse parking lot. From there, I could see Raphael pacing next to his car, his phone glued to his ear. He gestured with his free hand. He ran his fingers through his hair. He looked desperate. Pilar came in with a cup of hot tea. "How do you feel, Mrs. Vega?" "Like I just woke up after sleeping for 3 years. She smiled sadly. "The whole room is talking. No one can believe that you are Carmen Dominguez's mother-in-law. Some of the younger attorneys didn't even know you had been a judge here." I slowly drank the tea, feeling the warmth go down my throat. Outside, Raphael had stopped pacing. Now he was sitting on the hood of his car with his head in his hands, alone broken. A part of me wanted to go out, hug him, tell him everything would be okay. But another part, the part that had woken up when I read that message, knew this was necessary, that I couldn't continue being the mother who made herself small so they could feel big. Pilar approached the window and followed my gaze. "Do you think he knew who you were?" "No. Raphael never asked about my job. He was never interested in knowing what I did when I wasn't with him. When he graduated from college, I was already a judge, but he was so busy building his own career that he never looked back. He never saw the woman who sacrificed everything so he could have that career. It must have hurt you a lot." "It did hurt for years, but now it doesn't hurt anymore. Now I only feel clarity." The clock chimed, marking 10:50. It was time to go back. Pilar helped me adjust the robe. I looked at myself one last time in the small mirror hanging on the wall. The eyes that looked back were no longer those of a broken woman. They were those of a judge, those of someone who had recovered her identity. I returned to the courtroom through the same side hallway. When I entered, everyone was already in their places. Carmen had regained some composure. She had touched up her makeup. She had straightened her back, but her eyes still showed that barely contained panic. Raphael had returned. He was sitting in the same place as before, but now he looked at me differently, no longer with indifference. Now with something I couldn't completely decipher. Astonishment, shame, fear. I went up to the bench. I sat down. I banged the gavel once. "Court is back in session. Attorney Dominguez, you have the floor. I hope you use the recess to better organize your arguments." Carmen stood up. This time she carried a new folder that her assistant had surely prepared during the recess. She took a deep breath and began to speak with more control than before. "Your Honor, my client fulfilled all the obligations stipulated in the contract. They delivered the materials on the agreed dates. Payments were made according to the established schedule. However, the defendant did not fulfill its obligation to begin construction within the 90-day period as established in Clause 723. Better, much better than before. But I had already reviewed the entire case during the recess. I knew every detail, every weak point in her argument. I listened to her for 15 minutes. I took notes. And when she finished, I started asking questions, specific questions that any judge would ask in a case like this. Nothing personal, nothing outside of professional conduct. "Attorney Dominguez, you mentioned that your client fulfilled all obligations. However, according to the testimony of the site engineer that appears on page 42 of the documents, there was a 3-week delay in the delivery of materials. Can you explain that discrepancy?" I saw Carmen frantically search for that page. how her hands trembled as she flipped through the sheets, how her confidence crumbled again. That delay was due to circumstances outside of my client's control, Your Honor. A problem with the supplier. Do you have documentation to support that statement? I would have to review. Attorney Dominguez, I remind you that this is a trial, not an informal meeting. You are expected to have all necessary documentation on hand. If you do not have it, state it clearly. I do not have that documentation at this moment, Your Honor. Then your argument that your client fulfilled all obligations remains unsupported. Continue with your other points. Carmen's face turned red with shame, with contained rage, but she couldn't do anything. She was in my courtroom under my rules, and the rules were the same for everyone. The defense attorney, Mateo Fuentes, took advantage of every one of Carmen's mistakes. He presented solid evidence, verifiable testimonies, signed contracts that contradicted what she claimed. He was a competent professional facing someone who had relied too much on her arrogance. After 2 hours of hearing, I had enough information. Both parties had presented their cases. Now it was time to deliberate. We will take a recess of 1 hour. After that time, I will deliver my verdict. Court is recessed. I banged the gavel. The room began to empty. Carmen remained seated, head bowed. Her assistant spoke to her in a low voice, but she didn't seem to hear. Raphael approached her. He placed his hand on her shoulder. Carmen looked up and said something I couldn't hear, but I saw Raphael shake his head. How he withdrew his hand. How for the first time in years he wasn't on her side. I returned to my office. Javier Morales was waiting for me. He had been in the room throughout the hearing, sitting discreetly in the last row. Mrs. Vega, you did it perfectly professional, impartial. No one can say you acted with favoritism or malice. I acted with nothing but the law, Javier, as I always did. I know, but I also know this must be difficult for you. It's your family. It was my family. Now I don't know what they are. Javier placed the thick folder with all the evidence we had collected on the desk. The fraud, the debts, the forged mortgage, everything. Are you going to use this? Not today. Today I'm just going to do my job as a judge. I'm going to deliver a verdict based on the evidence presented. Nothing more, nothing less. And after? We'll see after. But they need to know they can't keep playing games with me. That I'm not the defenseless old woman they thought. I spent that hour reviewing every document of the case again, taking notes, analyzing the arguments of both sides. And even though Carmen was part of my family, even though every emotional fiber of my being wanted to punish her for all the harm she had done to me, my duty as a judge was more important. The evidence was clear. Carmen's case had enormous holes and inconsistencies she couldn't explain lack of crucial documentation. Her client had breached first, even though she insisted otherwise. I made my decision. I wrote it on 2 pages, clear, substantiated, fair. When the clock struck 1:00 in the afternoon, I returned to the courtroom. Everyone was already waiting. The silence was absolute. Carmen had her fists clenched on the table. Raphael was pale as a ghost. I sat down. I banged the gavel. I have carefully reviewed all the evidence presented by both parties. I have analyzed the testimonies, the contracts, and the attached documentation, and I have reached a conclusion. I paused. I looked directly at Carmen. The plaintiff, represented by attorney Carmen Dominguez, has failed to prove with sufficient evidence that the defendant breached the contract. On the contrary, the evidence presented by the defense demonstrates that it was the plaintiff who breached first by failing to deliver the materials within the established deadlines. Therefore, this court rules in favor of the defendant. The claim is dismissed. The costs of the suit will be covered by the plaintiff. The bang of the gavel echoed like thunder in the silent room. Carmen collapsed literally. Her body bent over the table. Her assistant had to hold her up. She had lost. And she hadn't just lost the case. She had lost her reputation. Because everyone in that room now knew she had been defeated by her own mother-in-law, the filthy old woman she had humiliated that very morning. Raphael had his hands over his face. His shoulders were shaking. And I, sitting in my judge's chair, my robe and my dignity intact, only felt one thing: peace. The room slowly emptied. The defense attorney shook his client's hand with a smile of satisfaction. Assistants collected documents. Security guards opened the doors for people to leave, but Carmen was still there, sitting with her gaze lost somewhere on the wall. Raphael finally approached her. He spoke to her in a low voice. He tried to take her arm to help her up, but Carmen pulled away with a sharp movement. She stood up alone, swaying slightly on her high heels. Then she looked at me directly, and in her eyes I saw something beyond panic and shame. I saw pure hatred, unfiltered, unmasked. She walked toward the bench. Her assistant tried to stop her, but she pulled free. She went up 2 of the 3 steps that separated her from me. The security guard took a step forward, but I raised my hand to stop him. Carmen stood there looking up at me from below, her face contorted with rage. This was planned. You did it on purpose. You lied to us your whole life. You never told us you were a judge. Why? So you could humiliate me now. Her voice trembled, but not from fear, from fury contained throughout the hearing that now exploded all the control she had had to maintain in front of the witnesses. I didn't lie to anyone, Carmen. You simply never asked. My son never wanted to know what I did for a living. You never showed interest in truly knowing me. You only cared that I was small, invisible, convenient. You're a manipulator. All this time you pretended to be a weak old woman so we would drop our guard. I stood up slowly without rushing. I looked down at her now. I didn't pretend to be weak. You assumed I was. There's a difference. And today you didn't lose because I wanted revenge. You lost because you came unprepared. Because you relied on your arrogance instead of your work. That defeat is entirely yours. Carmen clenched her fists. For a moment I thought she would try to hit me again, but the security guard moved closer, and she realized where she was, that she couldn't do anything anymore. This is not over. I'm going to appeal. I'm going to prove there was a conflict of interest, that you couldn't be a judge in a case where I was the attorney. Go ahead, appeal. But I warn you that the entire proceeding was recorded. Every word, every decision. And any judge who reviews this case will come to the same conclusion. You lost because your case was weak, not because I was your mother-in-law. Carmen walked down the steps. She walked toward the exit with quick steps. Her assistant followed her, carrying all the folders. When she reached the door, she stopped. She turned around one last time. Raphael deserves better than a mother like you. The words should have hurt me a few months ago. They would have shattered me. But now I just let them float in the air, weightless, powerless. Raphael deserves a mother who doesn't have to hide to be loved, and a wife who doesn't manipulate him to get what she wants. But those are decisions he will have to make alone. Carmen slammed the door shut. The sound echoed in the now empty room. Raphael was still sitting in his spot, motionless, as if he couldn't decide what to do, where to go, who to believe. I stepped down from the bench. I took off the robe, slowly folding it carefully. Pilar appeared at the door. Do you need anything, Mrs. Vega? No, thank you, Pilar. I'm done here. I walked toward the exit. I had to pass by Raphael. When I reached him, he stood up. We looked at each other for the first time in years. Really looked, without Carmen in between. Without excuses, without lies. Mom, his voice broke. I saw tears in his eyes. But I didn't stop. Not yet. Because there were things that needed to be said. And this wasn't the time or the place. Raphael, when you're ready to talk for real, you know where I live. In that little house your wife is so ashamed of. In that house you plan to sell out from under me without asking. His face paled even more. How do you know that? I saw Carmen's message on your phone 6 months ago declaring me incompetent, selling my house, putting me in a nursing home. All planned without my knowledge, without my consent. Raphael recoiled as if I had hit him. It wasn't. She was just what Raphael, planning my life without consulting me, stealing my dignity, and you just going to allow it, without defending me, without even asking me if I agreed. He didn't answer. He dropped back into the chair, his hands covering his face. I wanted to have this conversation at another time. I wanted to give you time to process everything you just discovered about me. But you need to know something right now. I am not the enemy. I never was. I was just a mother who loved her son so much she made herself invisible so as not to inconvenience him. And that was my mistake. Mom, I didn't know. I didn't know you were a judge. I didn't know how important you were. I didn't know anything. Exactly. You didn't know because you never asked. Because you assumed my life began and ended with being your mother. Because Carmen convinced you I was a hindrance and you believed her. I hung the robe over my arm. I took a step toward the door, but Raphael stopped me. What am I going to do now? I turned to look at him. My son, the boy I had raised alone, the man he had become and whom I no longer recognized. You're going to decide, Raphael. You're going to decide if you want to continue being the man who allows his wife to humiliate his mother, or if you want to get back some of the person you used to be. But that decision is yours, not mine. I can no longer make it for you. I left the courtroom. Pilar was waiting for me in the hallway with a sad smile. You were incredible, Mrs. Vega. Everyone is talking about you, saying you are the same brilliant judge you always were. I don't feel brilliant, Pilar. I feel tired. She hugged me. And for the first time all day, I allowed myself to feel the weight of what had just happened, of what I had had to do, of how I had exposed my own family in front of strangers. But I also felt something else. I felt that I had recovered something I had lost years ago. My voice, my identity, my power. Javier was waiting for me in the lobby. When he saw me, he smiled. Judge Vega, it was an honor to see you work again. Thank you, Javier, for everything, for helping me get here. What's next? I took out my phone. I dialed a number I had saved for months, the one for the court reporter at the local newspaper. She had covered many of my cases when I was active. She knew my reputation. She answered on the third ring. Judge Vega, I can't believe it's you. I thought you had fully retired. I did, but today I came back for a special case, and I think I have a story that will interest you. I told her everything, not with personal details, but with facts. A respected retired judge returning for a day. An arrogant attorney who turns out to be her daughter-in-law. A hearing where professionalism overcame arrogance. A fair verdict despite family ties. The reporter listened in silence. I could hear her pen scribbling notes on the other end of the line. This is going on the front page tomorrow. It's exactly the kind of story people need to read. Just make sure it's accurate. I don't want unnecessary drama, just the truth. The truth is dramatic enough on its own, Judge. I hung up. Javier looked at me with a mixture of admiration and concern. Are you sure about making this public? Completely sure. Because if I don't do it, Carmen will tell her version. She'll say I was unfair, that I abused my power, that I persecuted her for revenge, and I'm not going to give her that opportunity. We left the courthouse together. The afternoon sun hit my face. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth on my skin. When I opened them, I saw Raphael standing next to his car alone. Carmen was already gone. He looked at me from afar as if he wanted to approach but didn't know how. I looked back at him, and then I turned and walked toward the taxi Javier had called. I had spent 30 years of my life putting Raphael first, sacrificing myself, making myself small, hoping he would see me. But today, for the first time in decades, I put myself first. And it felt like freedom. The news was on the front page of the newspaper the next morning. The headline was simple but forceful. Retired judge returns to deliver justice in case involving her daughter-in-law as attorney. The photo accompanying the article was of me from my active years at the courthouse wearing the robe, and that serious gaze I always used during hearings. The article was accurate, professional. It detailed my 30-year career as a judge, the important cases I had resolved, my impeccable reputation, and then it narrated what happened the day before, how Carmen Dominguez had lost an important case in front of a judge who turned out to be her mother-in-law, how the hearing had been recorded and reviewed by other judges who confirmed that the entire proceeding was impartial and fair. The reporter had also gotten statements from attorneys who were present in the courtroom. They all agreed on the same thing. Attorney Dominguez had arrived unprepared. Her arguments had huge holes. The verdict was correct based solely on the evidence presented. My phone started ringing at 7 Haziras in the morning. Former colleagues, judges I had worked with, professors from the law school. Everyone called to congratulate me, to tell me they had missed me, to ask if I would consider coming back even as a consultant. At 9 Haziras in the morning, the phone at Raphael's firm also started ringing. But those calls were very different. Clients asking why Carmen Dominguez was still working there after such public humiliation. Partners worried about the firm's reputation. Young attorneys whispering in the hallways. Javier arrived at my house at 10 hours with another folder. This time it wasn't about the courthouse case. It was about something much more serious. Mrs. Vega, we need to talk about what we found. We can't wait any longer. He opened the folder on my kitchen table. Bank documents, transfers, emails, all the evidence of Carmen's fraud, the 50,000 euros diverted from the firm, the hidden debts, the forged mortgage on Raphael's house. And there's more. I spoke with a friend on the State Bar Ethics Board. Carmen has 3 formal complaints against her for malpractice. Cases where she didn't show up to hearings, clients she never called back, documents she never prepared. Does Raphael know anything about this? I don't think so. I've reviewed everything, and it seems Carmen managed the firm's finances alone. Raphael signed whatever she put in front of him without checking. He trusted her completely. Until yesterday. Exactly until yesterday. My doorbell rang. Javier and I exchanged glances. I wasn't expecting visitors. I approached the door cautiously and looked through the peephole. It was Raphael. He was standing at my entrance, the newspaper folded under his arm with deep dark circles under his eyes, and his suit wrinkled as if he had slept in it if he had slept at all. I opened the door slowly. Raphael? Mom, can I come in? I stepped aside. He walked in and stopped when he saw Javier sitting at the kitchen table with all the documents spread out. His face turned pale. What is all this? Javier started to gather the papers, but I stopped him. Leave them, Javier. Raphael has the right to know. My son approached the table. He looked at the documents, the numbers, the emails. He picked one up, then another. His hands started to tremble. This is from the firm. These are our accounts. Why do you have this? Because I needed to protect myself, Raphael. When I found out you planned to declare me incompetent and sell my house, I hired Javier to investigate, and we found much more than we expected. Raphael read in silence for several minutes. I watched as his expression changed from confusion to disbelief and then to pure horror. 50,000 euros. She took 50,000 euros. And this mortgage. My signature is here, but I never signed this. It's forgery, Javier said softly. Carmen mortgaged your house without your consent. She used the money to pay her own debts. Raphael slumped into a chair. He dropped the papers on the table as if they burned. I can't believe this. All this time I thought we were building something together. I thought she loved me. I sat across from him for the first time in years. We were alone without Carmen between us, without lies, without acting. Raphael, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Whatever it is, Mom. Did you really want to declare me incompetent? Or was it all her idea? He looked up. Tears ran down his face. She said you were losing your memory, that you were forgetting things, that one day she found you confused in the street, without remembering how you had gotten there. She said you were becoming dangerous to yourself, that it was for your own good. That never happened, Raphael. Never. My mind is perfect. I have recent medical evaluations that prove it. Carmen invented all that to convince you that I was incompetent. But why? Why would she do something like that? I showed him the documents of her debts, the expired loans, the threats of foreclosure, the calls from collectors. Because she needed money desperately, and my house is worth 175,000 euros. It was her salvation. But to get it, she first had to get me out of the way. Raphael put his hands to his head. His whole body trembled. My God, what have I done? I abandoned you. I left you alone. I allowed her to treat you like trash. And all this time you are a judge. A respected professional, a woman who sacrificed everything to give you a better life. Yes, Raphael, that's what I am. Why did you never tell me? Because I wanted you to love me for being your mother, not for being important, not for having a title, just for being me. But I was wrong. I should have told you the truth from the beginning. Silence filled the kitchen. Javier had stayed quiet, giving us space. Finally, Raphael spoke in a trembling voice. What are you going to do with all this, with the evidence of the fraud, with the forgery? That decision is yours, Raphael. You are her husband. You are her partner in the firm. If you present this evidence, Carmen will lose her license to practice. She will probably face criminal charges. Your reputation will also suffer because you are her partner. But if you don't do anything, she will continue to destroy everything she touches. I can't. I need time to think. You don't have much time. The state bar auditors are already reviewing the firm because of the complaints against her. They will find the missing money eventually. It's better if you get ahead of it. Raphael stood up. He walked to the window. He looked outside without really seeing anything. I loved her, Mom. Or I thought I loved her. Now I don't know what was real and what was a lie. I approached him. I put my hand on his shoulder. He felt thinner, more fragile than I remembered. Sometimes the people we love are not who we think they are, and accepting that hurts more than anything else. But you have to decide, son, are you going to protect her or are you going to protect yourself?" Raphael turned to look at me, and in his eyes I saw the boy he had been, scared, lost, seeking guidance. "What would you do?" I already made my decision. I protected myself, I defended myself, and I recovered my dignity. Now it's your turn to do the same. He nodded slowly. He took the documents from the table. He tucked them under his arm. "I'm going to talk to the auditors. I'm going to hand over everything. And I'm going to divorce Carmen." His words sounded firm, decisive. For the first time in years, my son was making a decision for himself. "And the girls?" I asked softly. "The girls are going to meet their real grandmother, not the insignificant old lady Carmen wanted you to be. The real woman, the judge, the fighter." Raphael approached and hugged me, a long hug tight, full of years of distance and regret. "Forgive me, Mom, for everything." I hugged him back, feeling how something inside me, something that had been broken for so long, finally began to heal. 3 weeks after the day in court life as I knew it had completely changed. The morning after our confrontation, Raphael presented all the evidence of fraud to the Bar Association and to the relevant authorities. It was a painful decision, but necessary. He called me that same night, his voice exhausted but firm. "It's done, Mom. I gave them everything: the falsified transfers, the fraudulent mortgage, the diverted funds. Carmen is devastated, but not out of remorse, only because she was caught." "Where is she now?" "She went to her parents' house in Barcelona. She took the girls. She says she needs time away from me, that I betrayed her." There was a pause. "Can you believe it? She deceived me for years, forged my signature, planned to steal your house, and now I'm the one who betrayed her." "The truth hurts more when you face it than when you avoid it," I said softly. "Yes," he replied, "and I avoided it for too long." As expected, Carmen didn't leave without a fight. 2 days later, I received a call from Ana Suarez, the young court clerk who had recorded the altercation in the courthouse hallway. "Mrs. Vega, I think you should know. Attorney Dominguez is filing a formal complaint against you with the Judicial Ethics Commission. She alleges there was a clear conflict of interest and that you used your position for personal revenge." "I expected that," I replied. "Does her complaint have any merit?" "In my opinion, not much. The process was recorded and you maintained impeccable professional conduct. Besides," she paused, "I sent your lawyer the recording from the hallway, where she assaulted and threatened you. That should demonstrate who had personal motivations." "Thank you, Ana. It's brave of you to get involved." "My father was a judge for 30 years, she said in a lower voice. "And I saw my mother endure similar humiliations from my stepmother. Some battles are worth fighting." In the days that followed, the case became a hot topic in Madrid's legal community. To my surprise, opinion was divided. Many supported my actions, recognizing that I had maintained professional standards, despite the personal circumstances. But others questioned whether I should have disclosed my family relationship or recused myself. The Judicial Ethics Commission announced that it would hold a formal hearing to analyze my conduct. It would be in 3 weeks. Meanwhile, the case against Carmen was moving quickly. The evidence was too overwhelming to be ignored. One afternoon, as I was reviewing documents for my ethics hearing, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, I found an unexpected surprise. It was Sophia and Elena, my granddaughters, accompanied by Raphael. "Grandmother!" shouted Sophia, the older one, throwing herself into my arms without hesitation. Elena, always more cautious, stayed back, studying me with curiosity. The surprise left me speechless. I hugged Sophia, feeling how her small body pressed against mine without reservation, with that absolute trust that only children can show. I looked up at Raphael, who was smiling timidly. "They were with my parents in Madrid," he explained. "Carmen left them there before returning to Barcelona. I told my parents it was time they met their grandmother, the real one." "Grandmother," Elena finally said, approaching with cautious steps. "Dad says you're a very important judge. Is that true?" I crouched down to be at her level, looking into her eyes so similar to Raphael's when he was little. "I was for many years, sweetheart. Now I'm retired." "And do you send bad people to jail?" Her eyes opened with fascination. "Not exactly. Judges listen to both sides of a story and decide who is right according to the law. Like when Sophia and I fight and Dad has to decide who started it," she said, processing the information in her own way. "Something like that." I smiled. "Would you like to come in? I have freshly baked cookies." The afternoon passed like a dream. The girls explored my house with curiosity, stopping at every photograph, at every object. Sophia found an old photo of Raphael when he was her age. "Dad was like me," she exclaimed in amazement. I showed them some of my most precious belongings, the plaque given to me when I retired, photos of when I was appointed magistrate, an old law book that Antonio had given me on our first anniversary. "Why did Mom say you weren't important?" Elena suddenly asked with that brutal honesty of children. Raphael, who was sitting on the sofa watching us, visibly tensed, but I just smiled and took Elena's hand in mine. Sometimes adults don't see the same thing when they look at a person. Your mother saw an old woman who no longer worked. I knew who I was, but I didn't always show it. "You seem very important to me," she declared decisively. "She is the most important person I know," Raphael added with a serious voice. And it took me too long to remember that. While I prepared hot chocolate in the kitchen, I heard Raphael speaking softly with the girls in the living room. "Your mother and I aren't going to live together anymore," he was explaining. "But that doesn't mean we don't still love her, or that she doesn't love you. Sometimes adults make mistakes and need to separate to avoid hurting each other more." "Like when Sophia and I fight and you separate us into different rooms?" Elena asked. "Something like that," he replied, and I could hear the sad smile in his voice. "Can we still come see Grandmother?" Sophia asked. "As many times as you want," Raphael answered. "We should have done it a long time ago." That night, after the girls fell asleep in the guest room that had never been used, Raphael and I sat on the terrace. The Madrid night sparkled with thousands of lights, each representing a story, a life, a path. Mine had taken an unexpected turn, bringing me back to where I started, but with a completely new perspective. "The firm is in chaos," he said, looking at the city. "Clients are leaving. The partners want me to change the name of the firm. Carmen could face up to 5 years in prison for fraud and forgery." "How do you feel about all this?" I asked. He remained silent for a long moment. "Betrayed. Used. Stupid for not having seen it before." He took a sip of his coffee. "But also relieved. As if I had been carrying an invisible weight for years and finally someone had taken it off me." He looked at me directly. "Thank you for freeing me, Mom." "I didn't free you, Raphael. I just showed you the door. You decided to cross it." "I've been thinking a lot about Dad these days," he said, changing the subject. "About what he would say about all this. About how disappointed he would be in me." "Your father would be proud to see you correcting your path," I assured him. "Antonio never expected you to be perfect, just to be honest with yourself. Why did you never tell me about your career, about everything you achieved? All these years I thought you had just been an administrative clerk at the courthouse." This was the question I had been expecting, the one I needed to answer with complete honesty. "At first, when you were a teenager and Antonio died, I didn't want to overwhelm you with my ambitions. You were going through your own grief. Then, when I became a judge, you were already in college, building your own identity. I didn't want you to feel you had to live under my shadow." I took a deep breath before continuing. "And afterwards I simply assumed you didn't care. You never asked. The day of my retirement, when you didn't come to the ceremony, I decided that if 30 years of service weren't enough to interest you, then nothing would be. I preferred to be just your mother, not your mother the judge." Raphael lowered his gaze, ashamed. "That was unforgivable. I remember that day. Carmen had a dinner with important clients and convinced me that your ceremony was just a bureaucratic formality, that it didn't mean that much to you. I'm not looking for someone to blame, Raphael. I'm just answering your question. Do you know what's most ironic?" he said with a bitter laugh. "I always admired you. When I was a child, I told my friends that my mother was the smartest woman in the world, that she could solve any problem, that she always knew what was fair. And then I grew up and forgot how extraordinary you were. I felt tears forming in my eyes. After so many years feeling invisible, his words were like water in the desert. "It's never too late to remember," I said softly. "No, it's not," he replied, taking my hand. "And I promise I will never forget again." The day of my hearing before the Judicial Ethics Commission arrived faster than I expected. The room was full, retired judges, lawyers, journalists, all eager to witness this unusual proceeding. I sat at the defendant's table, a drastic change after 3 decades on the other side. Carmen was there, of course, sitting next to her lawyer, an older man with a severe expression, whom I recognized as Alberto Mendez, known for defending judges and prosecutors in trouble. I was surprised she could afford his fees given her financial situation. I later learned that her parents had intervened to protect the family name. Javier sat beside me calm and prepared. Rafael was in the first row of the audience, nervous but present. The president of the commission, Judge Dolores Herrera, a former colleague whom I had always respected, called for order. We are here to evaluate a serious accusation that retired Magistrate Mercedes Vega used her temporary position as a visiting judge to favor her personal interests in a case where her daughter-in-law, attorney Carmen Dominguez, was acting as the plaintiff's representative. This tribunal will determine if there was a violation of the Judicial Code of Ethics. Carmen's lawyer was the first to speak. His argument was simple but effective. I had deliberately concealed my family relationship, had specifically sought out the case to humiliate Carmen, and had acted with obvious prejudice. Mrs. Vega's conduct is particularly concerning because it was calculated, Mendez argued. She arranged her designation as a visiting judge specifically for this case, knowing her daughter-in-law would be there. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a judicial ambush designed to publicly humiliate my client and ruin her career. When it was Javier's turn, he rose calmly. Magistrate Vega doesn't deny the basic facts. Yes, she presided over a case in which her daughter-in-law participated. Yes, she was specifically designated for that case. But the motives and context are crucial here. He then presented Ana Suarez's recording showing Carmen pushing me and shouting at me in the courthouse hallway. The room fell into absolute silence as they listened to the cruel words, watching the images of a practicing lawyer being physically aggressive with an older woman. This is the real context, Javier continued. Mrs. Dominguez didn't know her mother-in-law was a respected former magistrate. She treated her with contempt and cruelty, confident in her position of power. What happened in that courtroom wasn't revenge. It was a reminder that justice doesn't see status relationships or power. It sees only facts and conduct. Then Javier presented the complete transcripts of the trial, detailing every decision, every correction, every question I asked during the proceeding. Do you see anything improper here? Any decision that any competent judge wouldn't have made. Magistrate Vega's criticisms of Attorney Dominguez's preparation weren't personal. They were professional, based on actual performance in the courtroom. Finally, it was my turn to speak. I stood up, feeling the weight of all the gazes. I saw Carmen pale but still defiant. I saw Rafael with that mixture of shame and pride. I saw my former colleagues evaluating me. For 30 years I served this court with integrity, I began. I never allowed my personal feelings to cloud my judgment. That day was no different. I took a deep breath before continuing. Yes, I should have disclosed my family relationship at the beginning of the proceeding. That was my only fault. But it's also true that this case allowed me to see firsthand who my daughter-in-law really was in her professional realm, a lawyer who came ill-prepared, who presented inconsistent documents, who couldn't adequately defend her client. I looked directly at Judge Herrera. If I had ruled in favor of Attorney Dominguez despite the weakness of her case, wouldn't that have been a true abuse of my position? My duty was to the law and justice, not to family relationships. And I fulfilled that duty as I always have. The commission's deliberation lasted 3 hours. I waited in a small adjoining room, remembering all the times I myself had deliberated, weighing evidence, considering context, seeking the just path. When we returned to the room, Judge Herrera had a serious but serene face. This tribunal has carefully considered all the facts presented. Magistrate Vega's conduct presents problematic aspects, particularly her lack of transparency regarding the existing family relationship. This omission constitutes a violation of the ethical code. Carmen smiled slightly, anticipating a victory, but Herrera continued. However, we have exhaustively reviewed the trial transcript and find no evidence of bias or unfair treatment in her judicial decisions. Every correction, every question, every point noted was grounded in demonstrable facts and corresponded with the standard conduct of a competent judge. The judge paused, looking directly at me. Furthermore, this tribunal cannot ignore the broader context, including Attorney Dominguez's aggressive conduct toward Magistrate Vega before the proceeding, as well as the evidence subsequently revealed about possible illicit activities by Attorney Dominguez, which are being investigated in separate processes. Carmen was no longer smiling. Her lawyer was whispering something in her ear, but she ignored him, her eyes fixed on me. Therefore, this tribunal determines that Magistrate Vega committed an ethical fault by not disclosing her family relationship, but that said fault did not materially affect the integrity of the judicial process or the outcome of the case. The sanction will be a formal admonishment with no other consequences for her status as a retired judge or her benefits." She struck the gavel once. "The session is adjourned." The room erupted in murmurs. I saw relief on Raphael's face, fury on Carmen's. I felt a mixture of emotions, gratitude for the justice of the decision, remorse for my error, but above all, a sense of closure. This chapter finally was ending. As we were leaving, Carmen stopped in front of me. Her eyes, once full of hatred, now showed something more complex, a mixture of defeat, resentment, and surprisingly a glimpse of reluctant respect. "You won this battle," she said in a low voice. "But don't think this is over. I'll fight for my daughters." "I never wanted to take them from you, Carmen," I replied calmly. "I just wanted to be part of their lives." She studied me for a moment as if seeing something new in me. "All this time I underestimated you," she finally said. "I thought you were a defenseless old woman, an obstacle. I never imagined—" "That was your mistake," I gently interrupted. "Judging people by their appearance instead of really knowing them. I hope you've learned something from all this." She left without responding, with her back straight and her head high, maintaining the dignity she had left. I watched her leave and felt a strange respect for her resilience. Despite everything, Carmen Dominguez was not a woman who gave up easily. Raphael approached me. "Are you okay, Mom?" "Perfectly fine," I replied, and I meant it. For the first time in a long time, I feel at peace. We went out together into the Madrid sun, leaving behind years of silence and deception, walking toward an uncertain but honest future. The following months brought changes I never would have imagined. Carmen lost her license to practice law for 5 years after being found guilty of professional misconduct, embezzlement of funds, and document forgery. Surprisingly, she avoided prison thanks to an agreement with the prosecution in which she returned the diverted money and agreed to complete 500 hours of community service. Raphael completely restructured the firm. He changed the name, returned money to affected clients, and hired young ethical lawyers to rebuild the firm's reputation. It was a difficult period financially, but as he himself said, "I prefer a small, honest firm to a large one built on lies." The divorce was finalized in record time. Carmen surprisingly didn't fight for material assets. Her main concern was the girls. After intense negotiations, they agreed to shared custody. The girls would live with Carmen in Barcelona during the school year, and with Raphael in Madrid during holidays and alternate weekends. "It's best for them," Raphael explained to me one afternoon as we had coffee on my terrace. "Despite everything, Carmen is a good mother. She genuinely loves them, and they need her as much as they need me." "It's a mature decision," I told him, genuinely impressed by his growth. "Not many men in your position would be so generous." "It's not generosity, Mom. It's justice. Carmen made serious mistakes, but that doesn't erase the years she dedicated to raising the girls." He smiled sadly. "Besides, I don't want Sophia and Elena to grow up with the same void I felt when I lost Dad." One Saturday in October, 3 months after the ethics trial, I received an unexpected surprise. The doorbell rang early in the morning. When I opened the door, I found Carmen and the girls. "Grandmother," exclaimed Sophia and Elena in unison, hugging me. Carmen remained on the threshold, uncomfortable but determined. "They have a visit with Raphael today," she said in a neutral voice. "But first I needed to talk to you. Alone." I sent the girls to the kitchen for cookies and stayed with Carmen at the entrance. The silence between us weighed like lead. "I haven't come to fight," she finally said. "I've come to apologize." Of all the things I expected to hear, that was perhaps the last. I looked at her with surprise, searching for signs of deception, but I only saw an exhausted and humiliated woman. "These have been difficult months," she continued. "I've lost almost everything: my career, my marriage, my reputation. I'm living with my parents at age 43. She swallowed. "It's humiliating. I'm sorry for you," I said sincerely. "No, don't be sorry. I deserved it." She ran a hand through her hair, a gesture that strangely reminded me of Raphael. "I did terrible things. To you, to Raphael, to my clients. I was so focused on appearing successful that I completely lost my moral compass. Why are you telling me this now? Because part of my therapy is confronting the people I've harmed, and you were at the top of that list." She took a deep breath. "I never really knew you. I never tried. I reduced you to a stereotype: the meddling mother-in-law, the old woman who was in the way. It was easier that way." Easier. Easier than admitting I was jealous. Jealous of me. Carmen laughed softly without joy. Raphael always adored you. Even when he stopped visiting you, he talked about you with a reverence he never used for me. My mother always knows. She shook her head. I came from a family where respect was bought with money and privileges. I never understood that devotion based simply on love. Her words left me breathless. All those years thinking my son had forgotten me, and it turns out he mentioned me constantly. And then when I discovered who you really were, a respected judge, a brilliant professional who had made herself, it was too much. It confirmed all my fears that I would never be good enough, smart enough, worthy enough. Carmen, I never wanted... I know. You didn't do anything. That was the problem. I built this entire narrative about you without knowing you at all. She looked toward the kitchen where the girls' laughter could be heard. They adore you, you know. They never stop talking about their judge grandmother. Sophia even says she wants to study law like you. I felt my eyes moistening. They are wonderful girls. Yes, they are. Carmen looked at me directly. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did and that I deeply regret it. And also, she hesitated. I wanted to ask you to continue being part of their lives even when they're with me in Barcelona. They can visit you or you can come. It's good for them to have you. The woman in front of me was no longer the arrogant Carmen I had known. She was a broken person, painfully rebuilding herself from the ruins of her former life. I could no longer hate her. Thank you for coming, Carmen. It means a lot. When Raphael arrived an hour later, he froze at the sight of Carmen having coffee in my kitchen while I helped the girls with their schoolwork. What's happening here? He asked, confused. Peace, I replied simply. We're making peace. It wasn't instantaneous or perfect. There were awkward moments, tense silences, topics we avoided. But at that moment in my small kitchen where I had shed so many tears, I felt something fundamental healing. Not just in me, but in our entire fractured family. A week later, I received another unexpected visit. Pilar Navarro appeared at my door with an official envelope. The President of the Supreme Court wants to see you, Mrs. Vega, she said with a mysterious smile. Tomorrow at 10. Do you know what it's about? It's not my place to say, she replied enigmatically, but I would wear my best suit. The President of the Supreme Court, Gerardo Quintana, was a legendary figure in the Spanish judicial sphere. We had occasionally coincided during my career, but we had never worked closely. He received me in his magnificent office overlooking the Manzanares River, rising to shake my hand warmly. Mercedes Vega, what a pleasure to finally have a proper conversation with you. Your reputation precedes you. I hope it's a good reputation, I replied, thinking of recent events. The best, he assured me. Those who truly matter in this profession know how to distinguish between a procedural error and an upright character. And no one doubts your integrity. He then explained the reason for the meeting. The Supreme Court was creating a new mentoring program for young judges, especially women who faced unique challenges in a traditionally male-dominated profession. They wanted me to lead the program. We need your experience, your wisdom, but above all, your story, Quintana explained. You are a living example of how resilience and integrity can coexist. Many young female judges see you as a role model, especially after the recent events. I'm not sure I'm the best role model at this moment, I said honestly. On the contrary, it's precisely now that your example is most valuable. You've demonstrated that even the best judges are human, that they make mistakes, but that the true measure of their character is how they respond to those mistakes. He smiled. Besides, your recent case has done more to highlight the specific challenges that mature women face in our profession than 10 academic conferences. I left that meeting with a contract as a special advisor for the Judicial Mentoring Program, a pompous title for what essentially meant sharing my experience and wisdom with the next generation of judges. It was a new beginning I never would have imagined just a few months ago. Exactly 1 year after the day I discovered Carmen's message on Raphael's phone, we celebrated Sophia's birthday at my house. It was a small family party, Raphael, the girls, me, and to my surprise, Carmen, who had come from Barcelona for the occasion. My house, once so silent and empty, now overflowed with life. The girls' laughter filled every corner. Raphael had brought an elaborate cake. Carmen, thinner and with a more serene air, had brought carefully chosen gifts. It was strange but comforting to see us all together, not as the perfect family we never were, but as adults who had gone through fire and survived, transformed but intact in the essentials. After singing Happy Birthday, and while the girls opened presents, Raphael called me aside. "I have something for you, Mom," he said, handing me a small package. Inside was a bronze plaque with an inscription, "Mercedes Vega, Magistrate of the Supreme Court, Extraordinary Mother, Indomitable Woman." "It's for your office at the court," he explained. "So all the young judges who come to learn from you know exactly who you are." Tears came to my eyes without my being able to contain them. "It's perfect, son. Thank you." "No thank you," he said seriously, "for not giving up on me, for being exactly who I needed you to be, even when I didn't know it." That night, after everyone had left, I stayed alone in my living room, contemplating the remains of the party balloons, slowly deflating plates with cake crumbs, forgotten toys. Tangible evidence that my life had completely changed. My phone rang. It was Ana Suarez, the young court clerk. "Sorry for the hour, Mrs. Vega, but I wanted you to know that I've been accepted into the judicial school. I'm going to become a judge." "Congratulations, Anna, you'll be an extraordinary judge." "It's all thanks to you," she said enthusiastically. "Seeing how you handled your case with such dignity and professionalism despite the personal circumstances, it inspired me. I want to be that kind of judge." After hanging up, I went to the window. The Madrid night sparkled with thousands of lights, each representing a story, a life, a path. Mine had taken an unexpected turn, bringing me back to where I began, but with a completely new perspective. For decades, I had defined myself first by my profession, then by my role as a mother, then by my self-imposed invisibility. Now, at 71 years old, I finally felt complete. I was not just the judge, nor just the mother, nor just the grandmother. I was Mercedes Vega with all my contradictions and complexities. On my desk rested 2 framed photographs. In one, I stood in my judge's robe on the day of my appointment. In the other, I was with Sophia and Elena in Retiro Park, all smiling at the camera. 2 parts of me that finally coexisted in harmony. The path had been painful. There had been losses and betrayals, moments of despair and loneliness. But there had also been redemption, reconciliation, and a type of justice that went beyond courts and written laws. The justice of revealed truth. The justice of restored relationships. The justice of recovered dignity. I sat in my favorite armchair, the same one where I had cried so many nights, feeling abandoned. Now I felt a deep peace. It wasn't a perfect or permanent peace. I knew there would be more challenges, more difficult moments. Carmen and I would never be close friends. Raphael was still rebuilding his career and his life. The girls would grow up and face their own complexities. But now I knew we could face whatever came with honesty and strength. There were no longer secrets between us, no more pretenses or masks. My phone rang once more. It was a message from Raphael. "The girls want you to tell them a judge story before bed tomorrow. Prepare for lots of interrogation. We love you." I smiled. Life continued with its unexpected twists and its surprises, some painful, others wonderful. And I continued with it not as a shadow of myself, but as the complete woman I had always been, finally seen and valued by those who mattered most. I looked at myself in the mirror before going to bed. The wrinkles, the gray hair, the tired but serene eyes. And I said to myself, not with bitterness, but with pride, "My name is Mercedes Vega. I was a judge for 30 years. I raised my son alone. I survived abandonment. I survived betrayal. And I didn't just survive. I was reborn." The end.